a shadow on the sea, silently drifting, carrying with it a secret that could alter the fate of an entire nation. On the dark night of the 11th of October 2025, while much of the world slept, a half-submerged submarine moved through the Gulf of Mexico, just a few dozen miles off the coast of Texas. No signals, no communication, just a dark blip on the radar like a ghost passing by. Only the world beneath, and those aboard the vessel understood the danger slowly emerging, and that was just the beginning. At 2:12 a.m., the U.S. Coast Guard detected the anomaly. Initially, those on duty thought it was just a minor mistake, perhaps a fishing boat or drifting debris. But the appearance of this vessel could not be ignored. Within minutes, with support from a P-8A Poseidon patrol plane, it became undeniable. This was no ordinary smuggling ship, it was a semi-submersible vessel, something never seen before in these waters. It wasn't a fishing boat, nor was it an innocent object. This was a secret submarine, and it was carrying something that could change everything. This semi-submersible, 35 feet long, was capable of carrying 3 tons of cargo. What exactly was it carrying? Within moments, intelligence confirmed what seemed impossible. 3 tons of drugs, enough to devastate an entire state. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. What lay inside this submerged vessel, and the people operating it, were far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. In the next few minutes, a military operation began to unfold with precision. Special teams from the Navy, Coast Guard, and Homeland Security were mobilized. A seasoned commander, Emily Hayes, was tasked with stopping this smuggling vessel before it reached its rendezvous point. Her mission was clear: prevent the weapons from reaching their destination at any cost. As the task force gathered in secrecy, they knew that the cartel's operations had grown more sophisticated, and they were now facing a new kind of warfare fought in the shadows of the sea. With each passing moment, the task force moved into position. Their mission was simple: stay undetected while closing the gap. With minimal visibility and no communication from the submarine, it was a silent, high-stakes pursuit. Every sonar ping was crucial. As they closed the distance, the submarine attempted to submerge, hoping to vanish beneath the ocean's surface. Commander Hayes knew this was the defining moment. If the smuggling sub evaded them now, the entire operation could collapse, and they would lose their chance to stop the weapons. At 4 a.m., the task force was in position. The submarine surfaced briefly, just long enough for the Navy's advanced infrared cameras to lock onto it. As engines roared to life, Navy SEAL teams prepared to move in, knowing that when they engaged, it would trigger a fierce battle. As the task force closed in, the enemy opened fire, and a brutal gunfight broke out. Amidst the chaos, the Navy captured the submarine and secured the dangerous cargo. Inside, weapons far more advanced than anticipated enough to destabilize entire regions were found. When the submarine was examined, military engineers were shocked. It had been custom-built for the cartel, equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology designed to evade even the most advanced surveillance systems. It was clear this wasn't just a smuggling operation, it was part of a global network using military-grade equipment. Intelligence agencies soon discovered the cartel was producing more such vessels, each capable of carrying heavy weaponry undetected. This was no longer just about drugs, it was a full-scale arms race under the sea. By 9:15 a.m., U.S. intelligence confirmed the operation was just one piece of a larger plan. The cartel had turned into an industrial-scale producer of covert military equipment. These submarines were just one part of a more sinister operation. Similar vessels were already under construction, and this network could move millions of dollars in weaponry and drugs undetected. The cartel was evolving into a global military force, and the U.S. had to act quickly to dismantle this rapidly growing empire. But as they secured this victory, Commander Hayes and her team knew that this was only the beginning of a new and dangerous war fought beneath the waves. They thought they were invisible. They believed the ocean was their shield, a vast, endless abyss that could swallow their secrets whole. But the sea is not a sanctuary, it's a stage. And tonight, it was set for a battle no one had anticipated. As the semi-submersible glided through the dark waters of the Gulf of Mexico, carrying its deadly cargo, the cartel believed they had outsmarted the world's most advanced naval force. They were wrong. At 2:25 a.m., the command center at Naval Station Pensacola was jolted awake. The initial detection of the suspicious vessel was only the beginning. What seemed like a minor anomaly on the radar quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Intelligence analysts worked feverishly, cross-referencing satellite data, and the picture that emerged was enough to freeze the room. The blip on the radar was no mere ghost. It was a purpose-built submarine, a tool of smuggling far more insidious than anything the US had faced before. The object wasn't just a random vessel. It was the first in a new kind of warfare, a submersible smuggling ship capable of carrying 3 tons of illegal cargo, designed to be nearly invisible to traditional radar. Within hours, the task force mobilized. Commander Emily Hayes, a seasoned strategist known for her calm under pressure, was thrust into action. The target was clear, but the strategy was anything but simple. Every moment counted. They had no idea what was waiting below the surface, but they knew one thing for sure. If they didn't act fast, the cartel's operation would slip through their fingers, just like the tides washing over the shore. Time was now the enemy. The submarine, capable of submerging itself to evade detection, was moving east at a pace far faster than anyone had expected. If it disappeared below the thermal layer, it would be lost completely undetectable, invisible to everything except the ocean itself. Yet, the cartel underestimated the one thing they could never outrun: the precision and determination of the US Navy. Using cutting-edge sonar technology and AI-assisted tracking, the task force kept its eyes locked on the submarine. Each ping, each sonar echo brought them closer, but also closer to a race against time that would define the success or failure of the mission. The task force worked in silence, the weight of their responsibility pushing them forward. The submarine's movements became erratic, but they were always one step ahead. It wasn't just about tracking a vessel, it was about unraveling a threat that spanned continents, a threat that had the potential to destabilize entire nations. This wasn't just a smuggling operation. This was the early sign of something far darker: the evolution of an empire built on shadowy wars fought beneath the surface, in places where eyes could never reach. As the hours ticked by, the task force moved with deadly precision. A few minutes later, thermal imagery revealed something else, something they hadn't anticipated. 2 small corvettes, silent in the night, flanked the sub, carrying 25 cartel soldiers, fully armed and ready to protect their shipment. These weren't just smugglers, they were soldiers, and their mission was just as dangerous as it was profitable. The encrypted radio pulses they sent confirmed it. This was part of a larger network, a well-coordinated effort to flood the US with weapons and drugs. But the task force wasn't just watching, they were waiting. The plan was clear: stay undetected, keep the smuggling vessel in sight, and wait for the right moment. The cartel's hubris, believing their operations would remain hidden beneath the waves, blinded them to the relentless pursuit of the US military. Every calculation, every angle was mapped, every strategy refined. This wasn't just a battle on the seas. This was a test of patience, of resilience, and of readiness. And then came the confirmation. The rendezvous point had been identified. A cargo ship, painted in camouflage and operated by a Venezuelan cartel faction, lay waiting 90 nautical miles to the east. Its path was locked in. The cartel's network was now a ticking clock, a countdown to a massive weapons transfer. If the sub made it to that ship, 3 tons of methamphetamine and weapons would be lost to the world. The operation could disappear into the global trade, its effects rippling across continents. But this wasn't a race that was over yet. This wasn't just about drugs. It wasn't even about smuggling. This was about stopping an empire before it could fully rise. And in the quiet tension of the task force, one truth rang out loud and clear: victory wouldn't come easily. It wouldn't come without sacrifice. And it wouldn't come without the relentless pursuit of justice that America had promised. The game had begun. The cartel had underestimated their opponent. And now, the countdown was on. They had no idea what they were about to face. The cartel believed they were untouchable, that their operation was perfect, concealed beneath the black waters of the Gulf. But as they moved closer to their rendezvous point, they were unaware that a relentless force was closing in on them. A force that would shatter their carefully constructed empire. By 3:48 a.m., the US Navy had everything they needed. The coordinates of the cartel's floating rendezvous were locked in, and the task force was poised to strike. But it wasn't just a battle for control of a shipment, it was a fight for the very integrity of US borders. A fight that would determine whether this empire of shadows would survive another night. The task force, led by Commander Emily Hayes, had been waiting for this moment. They had followed the submarine across the Gulf, tracking its every movement, calculating each step with deadly precision. The sub's mission was clear: reach the cargo ship, deliver the weapons and drugs, and vanish into the dark, unnoticed by the world. But Commander Hayes and her team knew something the cartel didn't. Their invisible empire would not remain hidden much longer. As the task force moved into position, every part of the operation fell into place. The Navy's MQ-9 Reaper drone, equipped with infrared sensors, locked onto the sub. Its ghostly orange trail painted the ocean, revealing the submarine's movements with eerie clarity. From above, a single word pulsed in the air: execution. The cargo ship, camouflaged and waiting, had been identified. It was moving toward the submarine's expected intercept point. And with that, the countdown had begun. Commander Hayes knew the stakes if the cartel succeeded in their mission. 3 tons of methamphetamine and weaponry worth millions would disappear into global trade routes. The cartel would continue to grow, their operations expanding in ways no one could predict. But the mission had already crossed a line. This wasn't just about stopping a shipment, it was about dismantling an entire network, an empire built on fear and secrecy, before it could fully unfold. The task force was about to execute Phase Delta, a direct strike. The forces were in place. The USS Hamilton, a Navy patrol vessel, surged forward at 28 knots. Fast, deliberate, and precise. At the same time, 4 high-speed boats carrying 60 special operatives prepared to board the submarine and secure the cargo. They were armed, ready for whatever came next. But they weren't alone. A Seahawk helicopter swooped in, its engines roaring as it hovered just above the water, casting shadows across the ocean. The cartel's time was running out, but the cartel wasn't going down without a fight. As the U.S. task force moved closer, 2 escort boats, hidden in the dark, opened fire. The air erupted with gunfire, tracer rounds slashing through the night. The chaos of the battle was deafening, but the task force was ready. The Navy's gunners responded with heavy artillery, their rounds lighting up the sea like lightning in a storm. The Seahawk banked sharply, its guns roaring in retaliation, striking one of the escorts and sending it up in a violent explosion. Shrapnel scattered across the waves, and the cartel's shield was broken. But the sub was still in play. The U.S. operatives on the high-speed boats charged toward their target. Their mission was clear: board the submarine, neutralize any threats, and secure the cargo. As they closed in, they jumped onto the slick steel hull, sliding across the wet surface with military precision. The fight was now hand-to-hand, a clash of wills between those who would protect their empire and those who would bring it to an end. The breach was swift. The trapdoor blew open, and the operatives rushed inside. What they found was a nightmare. Inside the submarine's cargo hold were more than 2 tons of methamphetamine and liquid cocaine, sealed in black industrial bags, ready to be unloaded onto the floating network that stretched beyond U.S. shores. This was no longer just about drugs. This was a strategic weapon, poised to destabilize entire nations. The battle raged on, but the tide had already turned. 3 cartel operatives were dead, 5 were captured alive, and 1 U.S. sailor lay wounded, but still standing. The sub, crippled and listing, had been defeated. Its cargo was now secured, and the cartel's reach had been severed, at least for this moment. But even as the task force secured the ship, Commander Hayes knew this was far from over. The echo of a billion-dollar empire sinking into the sea was only the beginning. The war against this invisible network had just begun. The questions that remained were far greater than what was found in the submarine. What else had the cartel hidden beneath the surface? And how long would it take for the next empire to rise in the shadows, ready to strike again? The real battle had only just begun. The moment they thought they had won, the true battle began. The sub had been taken, the cartel's deadly cargo seized, but Commander Emily Hayes knew this victory was only temporary. Beneath the calm surface of the Gulf, a storm was brewing, one that no one could predict. The cartel had underestimated the U.S. Navy's precision, but they had no idea what was coming next. By 4:01 a.m., everything shifted. The cartel, though caught off guard, still had one card left to play. The remaining escort boats weren't retreating. They were doubling down, attacking with everything they had left. The initial exchange of fire had been chaotic, but the true test was still ahead. The cartel's desperation bled through the darkness as they fired their weapons in a last-ditch effort to protect their smuggling operation, their empire built on blood and greed. As the Navy's assault teams closed in, the cartel's 2 remaining lieutenants emerged from the shadows of the submarine, guns blazing. They fired wildly into the Night Uzi submachine guns and AK-103 assault rifles tearing through the air. Each burst of gunfire lit up the night like deadly fireworks, tracer rounds slashing through the darkness. Their defiance was a last act of desperation, but their resolve was already crumbling. The Navy's response was swift and decisive. From the USS Hamilton, heavy-caliber rounds rained down on the cartel's forces. The sound of gunfire mixed with the roar of a Seahawk helicopter overhead, its 50-caliber machine gun unleashing a hail of fire that shattered the silence of the Gulf. One of the cartel's boats exploded in a violent storm of fire and debris. The waves, once calm, now churned with the remnants of their failed escape. But even as the battle raged on, Commander Hayes was already thinking ahead. Her focus was unshaken. Even as the odds seemed stacked against them, every second counted. The cartel's desperate attempts to fight back were not just a sign of their will to survive, they were a mark of their strength. But they weren't prepared for the full force of America's resolve. At 4:07 a.m., the operatives launched their final assault. 12 Navy SEALs fought against the powerful spray of water as they closed the gap to the submarine. They leaped onto the steel hull, sliding across its wet surface, their hearts racing, their minds locked on the task ahead. Every moment was critical. Every move was calculated. They breached the sub in seconds. The doors gave way, and they were inside, facing the chaos of a hidden world. Chemical fumes filled the air, the smell of destruction, of a deadly empire that had been built beneath the surface. The operatives moved swiftly, securing the hold and discovering the full extent of what was hidden inside 2,260 pounds of crystal meth and liquid cocaine, sealed in black industrial bags, ready to flood the streets of America. The value of this stash alone was staggering, more than $415 million, enough to poison entire cities, enough to destroy communities. But this wasn't just a seizure of drugs. This was the end of a network. The cartel's weaponry, its plans for expansion, and its reach had been cut short. The Navy had struck a blow that couldn't be undone. The fight wasn't just about the drugs. It was about stopping the flow of violence, about halting an empire that had no boundaries. It was about making a statement. America would not allow these underground forces to grow stronger. As the battle ended, the toll was clear. 3 cartel members lay dead, 5 were captured alive, and 1 American sailor had been wounded. But despite the losses, despite the violence, there was no room for celebration. The sub, once an unstoppable force, now lay crippled, its smoldering wreckage painting the waves orange with flames. The victory was significant, but it was only part of the larger picture. Commander Hayes stood still, staring at the wreckage of the submarine. The Gulf, still and silent once again, seemed to swallow the sounds of the battle. Yet, she knew the truth. The war was far from over. This was merely one chapter in a larger story. The empire that had been destroyed tonight was only one piece of the puzzle. The true fight, the fight against the forces that hid in the shadows, was still unfolding. The echoes of this victory would reverberate across the waters, but Hayes knew the question that lingered in the air. What would happen when the next cartel, the next empire, rose to take its place? The challenge was not over. It had only just begun. And America would be waiting, stronger than ever, ready to face the darkness that still lurked beneath the waves. The truth was more unsettling than anyone had realized. What they had uncovered beneath the waves wasn't just a single rogue operation, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The cartel had evolved into a force that wasn't merely reacting to circumstances. They were planning, building, and preparing for a future where they controlled the tides, the currents, and the very flow of power. What America had just intercepted was not the first of its kind. It was part of a vast, silent network that had been operating under the radar for years. And this was only the beginning. As the team examined the wreckage, the full scale of the operation began to emerge. The semi-submersible, built with cutting-edge technology and equipped with military-grade stealth capabilities, wasn't an isolated incident. Intelligence now confirmed that this was a prototype, the first of 12 identical vessels already under construction. These submarines were not designed to carry mere contraband, they were designed to shift the balance of power on a global scale. With each new sub, the cartel was expanding its reach, building an industrial fleet that could transport 3 tons of weapons and drugs across vast distances without detection. But the scale of the cartel's operation wasn't limited to the ocean. This wasn't just about evading law enforcement. The cartel had become a multinational enterprise, and their influence stretched across borders, continents, and into the deepest pockets of power. They weren't just criminals, they were strategic engineers, military tacticians, and financiers, shaping the future of organized crime into a highly coordinated global force. It was no longer about just smuggling drugs. It was about controlling the flow of illicit goods and destabilizing entire economies with precision. They were using technology and innovation to wage a silent war against nations. What had been discovered in the wreckage was merely the tip of the iceberg. Inside the cargo hold, agents found more than $400 million worth of drugs. But they also found traces of military-grade weaponry, firearms, explosives, and ammunition, enough to arm thousands. This was no ordinary smuggling ring. This was an arms race under the sea, where each vessel was a weapon and each route a potential point of conflict. The cartel was preparing for something far more dangerous than just drug distribution. They were preparing for full-scale warfare. As the Navy processed the wreckage and analyzed the intercepted materials, the true gravity of the situation began to sink in. The cartels had not only refined their methods, they had redefined them. They were no longer just a threat to domestic security. They had become a threat to international stability. Their network had infiltrated key players in the global supply chain, operating in plain sight while maintaining the stealth of a ghost ship. They were not just shipping drugs, they were shipping power, influence, and violence, concealed within the very fabric of global trade. The technology embedded in the sub was a game changer. The homemade autopilot system, the encrypted satellite uplink, and the lithium-ion batteries provided the cartel with the ability to operate at long ranges, undetected, with an almost limitless supply of energy. This wasn't just smuggling, it was a new kind of warfare, one that operated beneath the radar, in the shadows, far from the watchful eyes of the world. The cartel had a fleet capable of running silent, their cargo invisible to conventional surveillance, their missions undetectable. And the US Navy had just caught a glimpse of what was coming next. The information retrieved from the wreckage confirmed a horrifying truth. The cartel had mastered the art of subversive warfare. They weren't just building boats, they were building an empire. And the US had barely begun to understand the scale of this new battle. Every intercepted sub, every bit of technology discovered, was just another piece of a larger puzzle, one that would require every ounce of America's resolve to solve. This wasn't just about drugs, it was about stopping a war before it could fully unfold. A war fought in silence beneath the waves. America had won this battle. But as Commander Emily Hayes and her team stood at the wreckage, they knew that this was only the first of many. The cartel's network was vast, and each move they made was more calculated than the last. The US Navy had uncovered the first step of a global arms race, one where the stakes weren't just about controlling the seas, but controlling the future. And in this silent war, there would be no rest, no pause. Only the relentless pursuit of the next empire lurking beneath the surface. The cartel was evolving, and so too would the fight against them. They thought they were untouchable. They built their empire on shadows and steel, relying on secrecy to shield them from the world's eyes. But they never considered the resilience of the people who stood against them, the ones who refused to let their empire rise unnoticed. The cartel had made a fatal mistake. They underestimated what America would do when confronted with a force like theirs. At 5:47 a.m., as the wreckage of the submarine smoldered in the water, US Navy divers began their descent. The task had only just begun. What lay inside the submarine was far more than drugs. It was a blueprint for a new kind of warfare. This wasn't a single, isolated operation. It was a new weapon, one designed to evade detection and slip beneath the radar of even the most advanced military forces. The cartel had built a prototype, a machine engineered to disappear, and it was only the beginning. Inside the sub, there were no high-tech digital displays or military-grade instruments. Instead, the controls were a reminder of the cartel's arrogance: old Soviet-era gauges, a compass, and an improvised throttle. But hidden beneath the floorboards was something far more sinister. A lithium-ion battery array weighing nearly 2,000 pounds, enough to power a submarine for 600 nautical miles without surfacing. Each battery cell was stamped with Chinese markings, a connection to an international network far larger than anyone had anticipated. The cartel's operation had grown beyond borders, beyond any one nation's reach. This wasn't just about drugs. This wasn't just about smuggling. It was about the creation of a weapon that could move undetected, powered by foreign technology, and capable of transporting both drugs and deadly arms across the seas. The cartel wasn't just building an empire of criminal wealth. They were building an empire of war, The Navy's investigation into the wreckage revealed even more horrifying truths. Behind a false wall lay the cargo chamber sealed steel drums, each one packed with methamphetamine and liquid cocaine. The drugs alone were worth over $400 million on the streets, enough to flood entire cities. But the real shock came when they discovered the autopilot system wired into the submarine's control module. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't an isolated incident. This was a calculated move, a sign of the cartel's increasing sophistication and ambition. The homemade autopilot was connected to an encrypted satellite uplink, and the coordinates logged inside revealed 2 previous routes from Venezuela to Florida. This wasn't the first mission. It wasn't even the second. This was the 3rd operation of its kind. The cartel had successfully slipped by U.S. forces at least twice before. The task force had only caught them now because of sheer determination and intelligence gathering. The cartel had learned how to play the game at a global scale, and they were winning. The wreckage of the sub wasn't just a piece of captured contraband. It was a symbol of a growing problem, an empire built on secrecy, technology, and military precision. Intelligence analysts confirmed that at least 12 more submarines like it were already in production, each one capable of carrying 3 tons of drugs and weapons. The cartel had developed a fleet, an industrial-scale operation that could evade detection and strike with the precision of a military force. This wasn't smuggling anymore. This was an arms race beneath the waves, a war fought in secrecy, far from the watchful eyes of the world. The cartel was no longer just a criminal organization. It was an enemy force, one that had evolved beyond borders, beyond even national defense systems. They were building an army, and the U.S. had just caught a glimpse of it. As the Navy processed the wreckage, the grim reality began to set in. The victory they just claimed was not the end. It was a warning. The cartel had not just been smuggling drugs. They had been building a future where power was measured not by the wealth of the cartels, but by their ability to operate undetected, under the sea. And if the U.S. hadn't intercepted this shipment, they would have continued, growing more sophisticated, more dangerous, until they were an unstoppable force. The Navy wasn't just facing a criminal operation anymore. They were facing a new kind of warfare, one fought in the shadows, beneath the surface, where the only rule was to survive. This was just one battle in a war that had no clear boundaries, no clear end. And while the wrecked submarine was a victory, it was also a reminder. The war against the cartel's new empire had only just begun. The victory was short-lived. As the wreckage of the submarine lay at the bottom of the Gulf, the real weight of the mission settled in. The U.S. Navy had intercepted a single vessel, but that was only one link in a chain that stretched across the globe. The cartel's empire was far larger than anyone had imagined. What they had found was just a fragment of a much darker network, one that had already slipped past the world's best surveillance systems and had begun to operate in the shadows of entire nations. In the debriefing room, the magnitude of the operation was becoming painfully clear. Analysts sifted through the data, cross-referencing every scrap of information gathered from the wrecked submarine. Every piece told a story not just about drugs, but about a dangerous shift in the balance of power. The cartel had moved beyond smuggling and into something far more insidious.
What is it?
The network that had been uncovered wasn't just about profits. It was about control, about shaping economies, destabilizing governments, and influencing power on an international scale. This wasn't just organized crime, it was the beginning of a global underground empire. The Navy's intelligence report revealed a chilling truth. At least 12 more submarines, identical to the one that had been captured, were already in production. These were not the desperate, haphazard operations of a criminal gang struggling to survive. These were the meticulously planned moves of an industrialized cartel, armed with military-grade technology and financial backing that spanned continents. They had infiltrated global trade routes, quietly creating a shadow network capable of moving more than 40 tons of illicit goods every year, a pipeline worth over $5 billion. And as each new sub emerged from its hidden docks, the cartel's ability to strike undetected grew stronger. The implications were staggering. Every successful mission meant the cartel grew bolder, more powerful, and harder to track. They weren't just smuggling drugs across borders, they were moving weapons, military supplies, and dangerous technology, all while eluding the world's most advanced tracking systems. They had learned to operate beneath the radar, to use the very infrastructure that had once been used to protect nations against them. They had created a fleet of invisible weapons that could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. The intelligence gathered pointed to a terrifying realization. These submarines were only the beginning. The cartel had transformed into an organized, well-financed entity capable of waging a war that wasn't confined to any one country's borders. They had the resources to operate on an international scale, and their reach extended far beyond what the U.S. had anticipated. They weren't just smuggling drugs anymore, they were seizing control of the means of delivery, building an empire that could undermine the fabric of society itself. It was clear now that the fight against the cartel had evolved from a law enforcement issue to a national security crisis. The cartel wasn't just a threat to the U.S. They were a threat to the stability of nations, to the global order. They were building a shadow network that could choke off entire economies, destabilize governments, and incite chaos in countries far removed from the Gulf of Mexico. The Navy, Homeland Security, and the DEA now found themselves facing an adversary unlike anything they had dealt with before, an enemy that understood the intricacies of international trade, the power of technology, and the politics of every country it touched. The operation had revealed just how deeply the cartel's influence had spread. Each successful shipment was a step toward consolidating power, and with each sub that was produced, they drew closer to their ultimate goal, a world where their influence could not be challenged. As the information poured in, it became increasingly clear that the U.S. had only scratched the surface. The depth of the cartel's operations was far more extensive than anyone had imagined, and each new revelation only raised more questions. How many more of these submarines were out there? How many more shipments had slipped through the cracks undetected? With the discovery of the cartel's expansion into Venezuela and other Latin American countries, it was no longer just about intercepting a few shipments. It was about stopping an empire that had already infiltrated global systems. A criminal network that had learned to operate like a state, with resources, strategy, and cunning beyond anything the U.S. had prepared for. The U.S. Navy and its allies now faced a daunting new reality. The battle against this cartel was far from over. They had only just begun to uncover the true scale of the threat. And the question remained, how much longer would it take before this shadow empire could no longer be contained? They had won, but it felt like the victory had come at the price of something much larger. The wreckage of the submarine, now resting at the bottom of the Gulf, was not a symbol of triumph. It was a reminder of what lay beneath the surface, of the unseen threat that had been lurking in the shadows, silently growing in strength and sophistication. The task force had stopped one shipment, dismantled one vessel, but the war they were waging was far from over. The cartel's reach extended beyond what anyone could have predicted. They weren't just criminals, they were strategists, financiers, and military tacticians, using technology and innovation to build an empire that could destabilize entire regions. Their network was vast, spanning continents, with the power to influence governments, economies, and lives. The submarine that had been intercepted was just one part of a much larger, global operation, a piece of a puzzle that had yet to be fully solved. And as the U.S. Navy analyzed the wreckage, as intelligence gathered the pieces, it became clear. The fight against the cartel had only just begun. It wasn't just about stopping one shipment, or even 100. It wasn't even about the drugs or the weapons. It was about the people, the ones who were caught in the crossfire of this empire. It was about the communities torn apart by violence, the families destroyed by addiction, the innocent lives affected by a network of power so vast and invisible that they never even knew they were in danger. The true cost of this battle wasn't measured in dollars or drugs. It was measured in the lives affected by the cartel's reach, in the futures stolen by their influence. The task force had uncovered something far greater than a criminal organization. They had uncovered a system, an underground empire built on secrecy, greed, and fear. And while they had struck a blow against it, the fight was still just beginning. Each new submarine, each new shipment, each new cartel member was a reminder that this wasn't just a battle between good and evil. It was a fight to protect humanity itself, to protect the values of freedom, justice, and hope that had built the nation. The Navy, Homeland Security, and the DEA were no longer fighting just to intercept drugs or arms. They were fighting to keep the very soul of their nation intact. This battle wasn't just about law enforcement, it was about defending the future, about ensuring that the next generation would not have to live under the shadow of an empire that operated in darkness. The cartel had shown the world the power of a global criminal network. Now, the world had to show the cartel the power of unity, of resilience, and of the indomitable will to protect what is good, what is right. The cartel had never faced an enemy like the U.S. military, like the men and women who had dedicated their lives to stopping them. But the real strength of the fight didn't lie in weapons or technology. It lay in the people who refused to back down, who stood up against tyranny in all its forms. It was in the hearts of the soldiers who understood that their mission was bigger than any one victory, bigger than any one battle. It was in the hearts of the families whose loved ones had been taken by the poison of drugs, who refused to let the cartel take away their hope. It was in the hearts of every citizen who believed in justice and the rule of law, who understood that this fight wasn't just a fight for safety, it was a fight for the future. But as the task force prepared for the next phase of the operation, as they rallied their forces and devised new strategies, they also knew the truth. The fight would not be easy. The cartel had been operating in the shadows for so long that it had become a master of deception, of moving unseen and undetected. Their methods were sophisticated, their reach nearly limitless. But the U.S. had something that the cartel could never understand: the power of a united force, the will to protect the innocent, and the relentless drive to bring justice to those who think they can escape it. And so, as the U.S. Navy and its partners prepared for the next step in their campaign, they also understood that they were not just fighting a criminal empire. They were fighting for the future of the world, for the future of every child who deserved to grow up in a world free from the clutches of organized crime. They were fighting for the dream of a world where justice prevailed, where hope was stronger than fear, and where the bonds of humanity could never be broken by those who sought to exploit them. This wasn't just about stopping a criminal empire.
Sir, we have
It was about
contacts.
protecting the values that had built this nation, the values that had inspired countless people to rise above tyranny and fight for what is right. The real cost of this war was not in dollars or weapons. It was in the souls of those who refused to surrender. And with every victory, every step closer to dismantling the cartel's global network, America was proving that even the darkest empire, built on lies and shadows, could never withstand the light of justice. The U.S. Navy had struck a blow against the cartel, but that was just the first chapter in a long and difficult journey. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the mission was clear: to protect the future, to protect humanity, and to ensure that no empire built on fear and greed could ever rise again. And with every person who stood up to fight, with every community that refused to be broken, the message was clear: no matter how deep the shadows run, there will always be light that can shine through. In the end, the battle against the cartel wasn't just about stopping one criminal empire, it was about defending the very essence of what makes us human. It's easy to think of justice as a distant concept, something that happens in the courts or in the halls of power. But in reality, justice begins in our hearts, in the choices we make, and in the resilience we show when faced with adversity. This fight, as intense and dangerous as it was, is a reminder that we all have a role to play in the world's greater story. The task force didn't just fight for national security, they fought for the futures of those who still believe in a world where hope can outshine darkness, where communities can rise above the forces that seek to tear them apart. Every battle, no matter how small, matters. Every act of courage, no matter how quiet, is a ripple in a larger wave of change. Now, more than ever, the fight for what is right is not just the responsibility of a few, it is the responsibility of all of us. We may not be in uniform, but we all have the power to stand against what threatens our peace, our freedom, and our future.
Commander,
So, as we reflect on this story, ask yourself, what will you do? How will you fight for the values that matter most? If this story has inspired you, if you believe that the fight for justice is never over, then stand with us. Share this video, like, and subscribe, because together, we can continue to shine a light in the darkness. Let's keep telling these stories, stories that remind us that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always hope, and together, we can make a difference.
we have multiple contacts. They are moving fast.